mark you get. The important thing is how you actually respond to a challenge, how you think about how you could respond better in that sort of way. So I want to go on to look a little bit about how we in London have been using self-tests. If we look here, we can see an example at Imperial College, where Nancy Curtin manages the self-test system at Imperial. Nancy Curtin is listening to the seminar here today. This is a menu of self-tests that is presented on Blackboard at Imperial, their virtual learning environment. And all of these links, you probably can't read these. I'm not really intending to read these, but this is a cardiovascular system, musculoskeletal system, a whole lot of different topics in medical science for the first-year medical students. These are self-tests which are linked on Blackboard, but they jump out of Blackboard to the system LAPT. LAPT stands for London Agreed Protocol for Teaching and Testing. The acronym used to be laptop because it used to say of physiology at the teaching and testing of physiology. Since we've now extended it to a whole lot of other areas, the last letters have disappeared and it's now LAPT. So these self-tests are run on the LAPT system, actually on a server at UCL. They store the students' data so that they can, one of these links, again, you probably won't be able to see it here, but the second link here, in fact, says Certainty-Based Marketing LAPT student report. The students can look at that and see their own session reports for the work that they've done in these self-tests. Now, very important is that these are learning resources. The marks given on these don't in any count on the student's record, and they're simply to help the students learn often by making mistakes. If they have a poor performance, that's often a sign that they really needed to do the self-test, and hopefully they've learned from doing that. So it's very important the students understand that this is entirely for their learning benefit and not part of their summative assessment in any kind of way. Many of these exercises were actually initially drafted by the students, and then they've been through a process of being vetted by staff members, and we'll talk a little bit later about the use of comment facilities for encouraging students to respond to things that they think aren't clear, the questions are ambiguous or incorrectly marked, or that they need explanation. These are things that it's very important in these self-tests to get a system to enable these to be efficiently dealt with. So that's linking these things from Blackboard at Imperial College. At University College, we actually use Moodle, and there's a similar facility for doing there. I'll show you now an example self-test on the LAPT system, which you can see first of all here. If we look at this is the index page for it. There are actually a very large number of questions. So one of the things that it's important to see about these self-tests as being different from an in-course assessment test that might be provided by the teachers on a course. These are self-tests are things in which the student is choosing what to look at. 645 questions is vastly more than any one would want to look at in a session. You're not assessing the students on their performance, how many they get right out of 645 questions. On any one occasion, they're going to be looking, for example, at the section which is about heart and circulation. They might decide that that's what they want to have a go at testing themselves and challenging themselves on today, and they could look at a modest of questions in that area, come back to them again at a later occasion, or they might be looking at some different topic. This exercise, like most of the exercises on LAPT, is on open access. And if you look at the website, which is, I can still see it on my screen as one of the things that Geoffrey Chris put in on the text on Wimber. If you look at that website, you can go to this exercise and many others there. And as I said, for UCL students, this is linked from Moodle in a context in the course VLE where it may be appropriate, and you can direct students to particular areas. Okay, so this is very much about student-directed learning, providing facilities for them to work in their own time, in their own way. Okay, so let's think about how to create these kind of self-tests. What are desirable features in a self-test like this? Well, a very important thing, since we're trying to get the students to think and to learn from their thinking, a very important thing is this first point, that you have immediate feedback after the students have responded to a question. And by immediate, I don't mean the same day. I mean within a couple of seconds of their clicking a response. If you wait any longer than that, the students have started looking out of the window or they started thinking about something else. You want to tell the student that they've got the thing right or that they've got the thing wrong while they're still able to bring back immediately all of the aspects that they were thinking about, why they chose the particular response that they did choose. So immediate feedback is extremely important here. It's not necessarily a feature of the way in which tests operate on many virtual learning environments. It's sometimes an option. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about one of the reasons why it's different on a virtual learning environment sometimes from the way it works on LAPT, where you get instantaneous feedback. With a self-test, the sequence of the questions is often quite important. And a self-test might simply be a past exam paper, but it's much better if you actually design a self-test with some sort of clear concept of a didactic sequence of questions. You want to be able to bring out the logic of a topic. You want to be able to sequence things in a way that chains of questions that lead the student in a sensible kind of way. A very important thing that you wouldn't necessarily do in an exam is ask questions that are deliberately perhaps trying to lead the students into common misconceptions. You may be asking a question in the full knowledge that most of the students will get it wrong because they're going to learn by getting it wrong. This will help to bring them up short and realize that the thing isn't quite as simple as they perhaps thought it was. The deliberate inclusion of questions that may be quite difficult questions, so you have to really think about it very carefully before you realize that the obvious answer is wrong, are perfectly sensible things to use in a self-test and very instructive things to use in a self-test. So you can have a mix of easy and difficult questions there so that you can actually make it engaging for the student. And even if they're finding difficulty with the topic, it's good to have some things that they actually realize, yeah, they do understand some of the basics in this. When we get on to certainty-based marking in a few minutes, we'll see that actually one of the things that comes out of this is that we have easy questions that you're asking as part of an exercise. It's really quite surprising to the person who writes, or sort of has been to be writing things like this that do have a mix of easy and difficult questions. It's really quite surprising how often the students will get the easy questions right, but they won't have expressed high confidence that they're actually getting them right. And you wonder, really, you feel it's really quite important that they actually learn the absolute basics of the subject with greater confidence in order to actually build on those. If you ask a student what is 2 plus 2 and they don't say they're sure of the answer, then you know that they've really got a problem there. So a very important part of self-tests going on to these explanations is that you want to be able to widen the thinking about an issue into other contexts. So if you ask a question, then okay, the answer may be straightforwardly given as a correct answer, but it's very instructive to in the explanation indicate how, if the question had been slightly different, then the answer would have been the opposite answer or would have been a different answer. This is the kind of way in which you can actually get the students to not only respond to a question, but to think around it a little bit, to widen the area that they're thinking about in relation to the issue at stake. You really want to kind of prompt, as I've put it here, the bringing together of different kinds of knowledge in this thing that we call understanding, really, of the whole topic. I already mentioned how students should be choosing what to do in these self-tests. Oh, I seem to have gone square here. Don't know why that's happened. You want clear navigation so that there are good indexes. The students can look at what the questions are, the areas that the questions are going to cover before they actually opt to go for them. When the students are doing self-tests, they may come up against a question that they realize that something that they really haven't been reading about much. They haven't perhaps read the chapter in the textbook about it. It's perfectly sensible in a self-test that they should go off and spend 10 or 15 minutes or something like that, maybe reading behind the topic before they carry on. So the concept of time limiting self-tests, I think, is not very essential. It should be up to the student to decide on their own learning strategy and how they spend their time. This is part of what we're trying to encourage the students to do as adults trying to get to grips with a subject. Now, I mentioned a little briefly before this concept of introducing a good commenting system. It's quite difficult to write questions that are completely unambiguous in their context and which don't have some room for discussion about whether something is or isn't the right answer. So in the context of self-tests, it's really healthy to get a good sort of dialogue going about what are the tricky issues behind a particular area. And a question might need to be rephrased, a question might have a wrong answer. This sort of discussion in dialogue that's visible to the students is not something that you would obviously want to have in an examination online test because it would mean that students could read about what's behind the questions before they actually try to answer them. But in the context of self-tests, it's a very sensible thing to try to do, and it's one of the things that in this lab system that I mentioned, I've tried to introduce as efficiently as possible so that you get the specific linking of the comments that students enter to specific contexts in the exercise. I actually have been thinking recently about taking this further and making it so that when you answered a question in an exercise self-test, as part of the explanation, you might get immediately shown the discussions that have been made relevant to that particular question. As it stands at the moment, there's a comment button on the lapped window, which would take you to where all the comments are for questions on that exercise. And you could look through that to see if there were any comments about the particular question that you've perhaps just been doing. But perhaps it should be done more automatic so that you always, as part of the quotes explanation following a question and answer interaction, as part of that explanation, you got shown the discussion that was around the particular topic. That's something that could relatively easily be added into the software system. Lastly, here, thinking about how, in general, to make self-tests work well, it's often encouraging. It's often sensible to encourage the students to work not just on their own, because